Welcome to this week's episode of Inspiring Women Leaders. And I am so privileged to welcome Sharon Peacock, Professor of Public Health and Microbiology in the Department of Medicine at the University of Cambridge. Sharon is also the Director of the COVID-19 Genomics UK Consortium, COG UK, and non-executive director to a whole range of organizations. Sharon, welcome to the Inspiring Women Leaders podcast. I know that you've got a lot of titles and a lot of experience, but did I capture everything in that first introduction?
Thank you, Leigh. It's so lovely to be here, actually, so thank you for the invitation. The only thing I would say is that the COVID-19 Genomics UK Consortium has now wound up its work, because I'm sure we'll talk about this, but we were doing a lot of sequencing of the virus that caused the pandemic to track how it was changing over time. But we've wound down that work. But otherwise, yes, thank you so much.
And a CBE. Tell us, how did you get your CBE?
Well, there's an interesting story about that, because I was at work and I was in a supervision session with my scientific students, and my phone rang. This was in 2015. And I often don't take calls for numbers that I don't really recognise. And it was a London number. And there was a man on the end of the phone with quite a kind of, posh accent. And I thought, is he going to try and sell me something? And he said, we've sent a letter to your home address, which has been returned as unknown. And I'm ringing on behalf of the Queen to see whether you'd accept a CBE. Your letter, the letter bounced, because we'd been moving around at this point, and I was in rented, and then we moved into another house. And so the letter offering me a CBE had actually been sent back to them. So they very kindly found my number. And what I couldn't do was actually crack a smile or do anything. My students were looking at me during this. I couldn't give anything away, because you have to keep it actually confidential until it's announced. So I was actually thinking, what do I say? And so I just said, yes, I'd be delighted to accept. Thank you very much. And then carried on teaching my students. And perhaps that's how it should be. What really matters in life is the people in front of you, the people that you can help. So I just got on with the rest of my day.
That's, so beautiful and so humble. Let's lean into that a little bit before we learn a bit more about you. What was it like meeting our Queen?
Well, I have to say that actually she wasn't there at the investiture. It was actually William, and but the whole thing was just fantastic. I have to say that I was warned before I went to it was done at the Buckingham Palace. I was warned not to wear high-heeled shoes, because if you think about the sweeping drive that they've got in Buckingham Palace, it's all kind of these big gravel stones, and you can't walk on them at all. So I got that right. But you know what? It was a super day, and I took my family, and we had a lovely meal afterwards. And the whole thing was just marvelous, actually. And in some ways, I felt uncomfortable, because CBEs are for work that you do with lots of other people, and only one person gets to go and pick up this gong. And so, there is a period of reckoning where you're going, well, this is for work that many hundreds of people have been involved in. And thanks to them, as well as going to pick up that award. But I wouldn't underestimate how important it was to go to Buckingham Palace that day and meet William. So it was a special day.
Truly special, and clearly an acknowledgement of the work that you have been doing. So I think we need to contextualize a little bit more for our listeners about who you are and the work that you are doing. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, what I do at the moment now is I'm trained as a doctor. That's my background. But I fairly quickly focused on academic research. Actually, within about 5 years of training as a doctor, I went into academic research. And I specialised in sequencing, most recently, at least in the last decade and a half, specialised in sequencing of microbial genomes. What that means, understanding their genetic code, which codes for everything that that microbes become and can do. And so I got a position in the University of Cambridge as a professor of microbiology, but really with that kind of academic background. And I guess the other two areas that I would talk about. One is I'm what's called a non-executive director on the board of Cambridge University Hospitals, NHS Foundation Trust. So that means I'm on the board, and I kind of help to kind of oversee what happens at the hospital and give advice, and really hold the executives to account for the decisions that they make, which has been an extraordinary journey over the last 9 years that I've done that. And finally, next week, I'm about to be inducted as the 8th Master of Churchill College in Cambridge. And so I have to say that I'm in a bit of a transition at the moment. So I'll keep my academic work going, but in a much smaller kind of way. And, very soon I'm going to be living in Churchill College and helping to be the figurehead and leader of that institution.
That's many congratulations. And I can't think of a finer person to be heading that up. And actually, you do see your life and your work in a series of transitions and phases, don't you? So if we go like where you are today, if I spoke to the 14 to 16-year-old Sharon Peacock and said, one day, lass, you're going to be, you would never have anticipated the work that you do today, probably right back then. I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that journey because it's so unique. It's not typical, particularly in the field of science.
Well, if you took me back to when I was 14, I'd never heard of the word Oxbridge. It wasn't in my kind of vocabulary, if you like.
Yeah.
So I found something called the 11 plus, which was the dividing examination to decide whether I was going to go to a state grammar or a state secondary modern. I found that. So I went to the secondary modern, and I would say it was a bit of a sink school because academic achievement wasn't on the cards. And if you'd gone back to my when I was 14, I would say that I would call this a dormant phase, certainly intellectually. I was denied the opportunity to do what were called O levels. They're the equivalent of GCSEs now in chemistry, maths, physics, modern languages. I couldn't have done any of that because I was too dim, apparently. And I had no career aspirations at all. So I would call this a dormant phase. I left school together with everyone in my year group, didn't know what I wanted to do, and went and worked at a local corner shop for want of a better thing to do with my life, because I'd worked there during sort of evenings and summer holidays, and so it was the natural progression for me. But I think I was probably asleep at the intellectual wheel at this point, really, and nobody had sort of found the key to start the engine.
Absolutely love that. Nobody could have anticipated that. And when you even think about the people around you, the environment around you, the way that the system measured you, nobody would have anticipated that. So what do you think could fundamentally shift and change in the way that we think about education and aspiration and opportunity, and even the story that we tell ourselves around failure? What do you think we need societally? We need to make some changes around that helps people to realize some of the aspirational goals and potential maybe exists within them.
Yeah, I would say it starts really young. So the family that you're born into is the family that you're born into, and I wasn't born into an academic family at all. They were working class. They'd left school. My mum and dad left school themselves at 14, and there was never any talk of career aspirations or going to university or anything like that. So I think that they were loving, caring parents, but that environment is really important. And so I think that if you're not getting that stimulus at home, you need to get it at school. Early education for younger people, really stimulating their brain around, not just sort of academic type subjects like maths and English, but also the world around them, everything that's going on around them, how to socialize, what's happening out in the big wide world and so on. I think that needs to start early, having conversations with people. But then as people go through their kind of school career, if you like, having those conversations with young people to say, these are your options, and engaging in discussions about their career. It's really interesting. I went and had my hair cut today, a bit of a diversion, but I went to have my haircut today, and the person that was washing my hair, they said they'd left school at 16, and they were none of them had careers advice. And I was really quite shocked that that's still happening. It happened when I was young. How is it that today we're not giving really strong careers advice? So I think that giving people strong careers advice when they're kind of at school. So I think early education, strong careers advice, And I think third piece is around role modeling, actually. So, showing what other people have achieved and how they've got there. I think hearing those life stories is really important. But role modeling can also come in widening participation programs, for example, from universities. So universities across the country have widening participation programs where you can go on residentials. The Sutton Trust, for example, are very strong in inviting people into university. And there you will see that actually universities they're great fun places to be, and they're where you can really unfurl your intellectual wings. So that is also, I would say, part of the role modeling, actually going to put yourself in universities and seeing what it is really like. And it's probably quite different to how you envisage. I mean, the college where I'll be going, incredibly friendly place, and Cambridge is very friendly, and people might think, well, I wouldn't fit in. Anybody is going to fit in to the college where I will be, and across Cambridge, we are a good place to come if you're intellectually curious. Despite everything else about you, it's the intellectual curiosity, and giving people the faith and belief in themselves to think, oh, I could apply to one of those universities is part of the role modeling, actually.
I think it's absolutely in terms of what you're saying. And I think there's certain factions of society that probably do have that career advice, that career exposure, that network exposure that says you can do this, you can achieve anything that you want to in your life. And then there's the majority of society that has the experience, particularly through the education system and in those early years, where actually none of that is necessarily true. They don't have that. It's just like, how do you just get through the here and now in today's system and pass some exams? And actually nothing about the potential. It's nothing about actually you can have aspirational goals and you can be anything that you dream yourself to be. You've proven that, because you didn't have that, by the way. You didn't have that as part of your journey, either at home or in the education system. And yet you pursued goals for yourself anyway. And I think it wasn't a path that you carved out for yourself. You didn't say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer in the first instance, and you're going to do your medical degree, etc. It came, through the journey that you followed, but actually you still managed to do it at different age points where people will be writing that stuff up and going, well, that's no longer for me. That's no longer for me. So doing your medical, was it your medical degree in your 20s? And
yes, I did. My mid-20s.
Yeah, which nobody would even fathom that. They would write those things off in the very early stages. So I think you challenge the stereotypes, the status quo, which I think is very powerful in terms of your story and your journey to how you got to where you are today. And I also hear it with the charity as well. Like, sometimes when we are working with certain organizations and we're saying, look, our work is here to help women and young people dream big and then follow to pursue fully with a support network and everything that's around them, but to pursue those goals. And they might change along the way, because actually that's the joy of life and work, but actually we'll help you to navigate there. I remember distinctly one conversation that I had with a referring organization that would send people our way that needed support. And they said, look, don't worry about kind of the aspiration. Don't worry about the dream goal. Don't worry about and it was complete. Everything was about suppressing down. If they can just make it, if they can just get a local job, that's not going to hold the attention. There is something about just also how we are biased in our opinions about what people's potential can be. And actually it just requires intervention along the way that helps them get there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really vital. Each of us actually, for example, my role as a mentor and as somebody who can encourage young people to apply to university. Well, I've already talked about how important that is, but, each of us can help in our own way to help young people achieve their best and to achieve what they're actually capable of. I think one of the biggest sadnesses is if a young person, goes through their life not really achieving what they are actually capable of doing, and feeling a frustration about that. So I absolutely agree with you that allowing people to think big, to dream big. And I do remember that, what I'd called the period of awakening in my life, which came after leaving school. It was a series of fortunate events that opened doors that helped me to progress in my career. So, a dental surgeon gave me an opportunity to train as a dental nurse. And at the time, it's applying for a job, and of course I fulfilled that job, but that was really the key to me understanding that work is really valuable and that actually healthcare is really where I wanted to be. And then I got into my nursing career, and I qualified as a nurse. And that was brilliant. I absolutely loved being a nurse and specialised in end-of-life care. But actually, even then, having gone through sort of 3 careers, I was shopkeeper and a dental nurse and then a nurse, there was still this sense that, well, you shouldn't do any more. Because actually, I remember my mum, I said to my mum, I'm going to go back to school and do some A-levels because I really like science. And 6 months into my nursing training, I'm looking at doctors thinking, God, that's a really interesting job. I want to do that job. I didn't tell anyone because I thought they'd probably laugh at me.
Yeah.
But once I'd qualified as a nurse and I was a staff nurse, I decided to go back to technical college and get science A-levels. I had to do the GCSEs first at night school and then do A-levels. And I said to my mum, I'm going to train to be a doctor. I had no idea how I was going to do this, by the way. It proved quite tricky. Yeah. And she said, well, why do you want to do that? Nursing is really good. It's a good career for you, Sharon. And why would you want to do more? So, and I think that she wasn't trying to suppress my ambition. She just didn't feel that would be something I could achieve. And I think that comes from her own background and the fact, she left school at 14 and didn't aspire to career. So, this kind of damping down can come from all sorts of directions. And I think you have to put your fingers in your ears and block it all out and say, if I want to do this, I'm going to really try hard and not be put off, not because there is, if there's a will, there is a way to get through this. But, these small opportunities can build up to create a ladder to where you want to eventually achieve. It was a bit like snakes and ladders, actually, but and it was quite a long ladder.
Yeah, because actually, of course, it doesn't mean that you went from here to here and to here, and people kind of, said to you about this wonderful job. Actually, you had to work darned hard along the way, and you had some challenges, you had some setbacks, you had some failures. So just to share that because actually you still pursued the goal despite falling on your posterior many times along the way, but you got back up and you pursued it anyway. There are times when you could probably have turned around and said, actually, no, this isn't for me. Because of X, Y, and Z. You could have been listening to the external narrative, everything that you've been told, and it replaces your own passion. And all of a sudden, bit by bit, it eats away. And then the aspirational goal is gone. So tell us a little bit about not just the highs, but actually the lows. So what are that to me?
I really like what you say about that. Before I talk about some of the lows, I mean, the internal narrative, you have to keep a way of stoking it so that it stays alive. And I think you have to surround yourself by people who believe in you. And that comes right way back to what you were saying about mentoring people and believing in their aspirations. And for somebody to say, I believe in what you can do, I believe in what you want to do, it might be the first time they've heard that. So keeping that internal narrative alive is really important. But yeah, I mean, after I kind of had this, I've talked about my dormant phase when I didn't know what I wanted to do, and then a period of awakening when I was doing the shop work and dentist and nursing. And then I would say there was a period of intense striving, trying to get into medical school. That wasn't easy because I was approaching my mid-20s by then. And there weren't many places for medical students in a mature level. There were 2 universities, actually, one in St Mary's in London and one in Southampton. Now there's lots of mature programs, but back then there wasn't. And I think my first sort of door slamming in my face, really, that I had to overcome was that I applied for medical school through, the kind of UCAS system, which people will be familiar with. And I was rejected 2 years running. The first year was a blow. I went back and retook my physics A-level because the result wasn't very good. And I tried second year and nothing. And I went through clearing where there's sort of spare places being given. I didn't get anything through that either. So I was going into my kind of 3rd year of failure, and I didn't know what to do. And actually my husband said, well, why don't you just pick up the phone and ring somebody in Southampton? I mean, I think that was bold and probably a bit cheeky. So I picked up the phone, and I'm not even sure this would work now, but I picked up the phone and said, I got through to someone and said, I want to speak to the admissions tutor for medicine, please. And they organised for me to see this wonderful professor of biochemistry, who's the admissions tutor, David Wilton, and he interviewed me. And I was a medical student within a month because he saw something in me. Somebody, I think, must have dropped out. Is it right? Okay. But so actually, I was trying to get into medical school. I was failing, but I wasn't prepared to give up lightly. And coming back to mentors and people giving you a lift up, David was somebody who really did that, because I think he must have taken quite a chance at the time. But that single act of generosity completely changed the course of my life, and that's how we can interact with people around us to do the same sort of lift up, actually.
Oh, I love that, the single act of generosity. And I think especially when we feel that we're failing through a process, through a conversation, through a journey, is that it can feel very isolating. And it's in those moments, it's almost like you transcend beyond that and go, well, actually, what now? What's the next thing that I can do? Because otherwise we get caught up in the narrative and the rumination that tells us that we're not good enough, we're not wise enough, we're not intelligent enough, we're not successful, whatever it is, whatever that narrative is. And sometimes we just can't do it on our own either. We have to reach out there and we have to say, can you help? Or just ask the question. I know that Jonathan pointed to a book in his podcast with you, which was around just ask. But I'm getting into the habit of this, but I'm learning this in my 50s. I should have learned it in my teens. Just asking the question of other people, because we can't do these things alone as well. And in the same respect is almost like to have that agency within ourselves, that despite what's happening around us, just go, this is just another step in the process. Even when it feels like failure, it's just another step in the process. I've just been down to London for a few days. We're doing this big Ride to Inspire event next year, and I create a vision, I supercharge the vision and I say, well, actually, I want to get here. And if we get to here, it's still far beyond where we were looking at before. So I'm always very ambitious. And some of those conversations you go into and you go, actually, I'm feeling so energized. These people get it, we're on board. And then others, it just feels like it's hard work. And actually that could pull you down. You go, oh, get back into your box, Leigh. What are you trying to do, Leigh? Stop. This is embarrassing, Leigh. Or you just go, no. And 10 doors closed. 3 doors open. I'm going to go through the 3 doors, and what's next? And it's almost like learning that internal narrative that you have for yourself, that you learn agency, and then actually also doing the ask as well. So I absolutely love that. You talk about transitions and phases in your life. Talk to me a little bit about, and our listeners, about that.
Well, I have mentioned that after I'd done nursing and I went into medicine, I had this sort of period of intense striving, and I was like kind of academically really hungry, if you like, and that was a transition for me. So I'd gone from nursing to university, but I completely unfurled my academic wings, if you like. I couldn't wait to catch up, and that was an important transition for me. But I kind of completely immersed myself in learning, and it was, some transitions are really difficult to adjust to. This, I would say, was a transition where it absolutely felt right for me. So I got a medical degree. I did a postgraduate medicine training. So I trained initially as a physician. I was particularly interested in the heart. And then I got really interested in infectious diseases and microbiology, which is what I ultimately got my sort of final qualifications in as a consultant. But actually, I then decided, whilst I was doing that kind of postgraduate medicine, that I'd take a degree in history. I really like learning, and it's like it's like a kind of container where it can take so much water, but it wasn't up to the top yet. So I whilst I was doing my higher medical qualifications, I joined the Open University and did a degree in history. I also did a PhD in research, and that's where I went down the academic route. And the trouble is, I think that container of water's got a leak in the bottom because I keep trying to top it up, and it's never at the top. I'm constantly trying to learn, so I'm always I'm always doing new things to learn, and that learning will often take me down a route. So I really liked understanding what the world of business was like. And I went to the Financial Times to train as what's known as a non-executive director. And there I learned about sort of finance and audit and management and HR. And that then, it was only because I was really curious. I thought, what do people do on boards? What do they talk about in board meetings? And what is it? What's business really like? So that was my kind of way into learning. And then that opened the door to being on the board of my local hospital. So yes, I think it's sort of, it's probably got more than one leak in that bucket that I can't ever fill up my intellectual curiosity, actually. So we started with transitions, we got into leaky buckets, but
can I lean into this? Because I think we'll come back to transitions, but I think there's something really important in here, which is your curiosity and learning was never suppressed. So in a system that we live in, we are assessed and we are observed and we get feedback constantly, whether it's our own feedback to ourselves or other organizations. And I think it starts even more so in the education system. But your thirst, your hunger for learning is it almost like quashes everything else, like the fears, the anxieties that build up in other people, almost like the seesaw effect. Your learning went right up and your ambition for it beyond anything else. Whereas for many of us, the fears, the anxieties around being tested or learning, but then being tested. Now, I don't know the answer, but there's something just mulling around for me, which is going, why is it we suppress the full potential of even a nation or of our next generation that stops us from learning because we replace it by fear and test and performance and you're good enough, you're not good enough. I don't know the answer, but
it's an interesting thing. I mean, I believe that I have a right to learn, and I believe that I have a right to explore. So if you think about people exploring the North Pole or climbing up Everest or whatever, I guess that's what I'm like intellectually. And I think I believe I have a right to learn and to have opportunities to learn. And, there's no doubt that when I was doing my final medical exams and so on, I was as nervous as the next person, probably more nervous, actually. I remember going into I had a viva after my first year of medical school, and this was a distinction viva, so it meant quite a lot to me. And I could barely speak, actually. I remember, actually, and in the end, they had to say, well, you've got the distinction, it's fine, just relax, and then I could actually speak. But I was almost monosyllabic at that point. So I'm not suggesting that I'm not fearful, but the kind of what I get out of learning and really thinking that I do have a right to learn. We all have a right to learn whatever we want. Some people might not want to do that. Some people might prefer a very different life. But I also think that learning isn't in a straight path. And so I think often at school, people will say, well, in order to do this, you've got to do that first. And you follow this very narrow path. Yeah. I think that people who are being born now, I mean, about 50% of people born now will live to their 100. That means you can have many careers in your life. You don't have to just have one. So I think my sense is that I want to learn. I'm interested in learning. I'm interested in exploring intellectual. I mean, and that might be reading a book or even working overseas, which I did. I lived in Thailand for 7 years. That is also my right to learn. I want to learn about a new culture. I want to learn how to work in that environment. I want to learn about the diseases of that nation. So I would suggest to your listeners that they can also embrace this feeling of empowerment about wanting to learn and not being suppressed, because who gives anyone the right to say you're not good enough to learn, or you've got to only go down a particular path? That's for you to decide, actually, and only you to decide.
And there's so much in our media and everything that exists around us that I think we live in the age of narcissism. I think there's something within that actually the external forces aren't our own path. Actually, how we measure ourselves and our success is really important. If we measure it by other people's standards,
Mm,
and he
mm.
spoke to you about the fact that we've been through our own psychological assessments, comparative and uncomparative. So it's been the bane of my life for many a year up until now, probably will be until my deathbed, but I'm still always managing it.
Mm.
But there is something in it. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I only compare myself with myself,
Yeah.
and so I will get up in the morning and say, you know, what can I do today that's good, that's useful, that's impactful, or you know, what can I learn today? And young people today will often compare themselves with other people, and you know, social media is a primary way people do that. They look on LinkedIn or somewhere and say, oh, you know, someone who I left school with, they've got this amazing career or whatever. You have to wear blinkers. I think perhaps I'm quite blinkered. I just think am I kind of on a kind of journey of improvement? Never mind about what anyone else is doing. And actually, 20 or 30 years later, if you look back on your life, you realize that those comparisons were utterly inaccurate. And useless, actually.
Yeah.
So I would really strongly recommend that people only focus on what they want to achieve and whether they are taking the steps to achieve it. And you can't be too hard on yourself, because sometimes stuff happens, you know, you might get ill, or one of your family dies, or something happens, and you have to sort of step off that kind of path for a bit, and that's absolutely fine. But comparing yourself to other people, it's a terrible metric. It's not an accurate metric, and it really can make you feel not as good as other people. And actually, I don't even know what that means. It's just like, simply, are you doing what you want to do in your life?
Now, you've spoken about the 100-year life and above, potentially for future generations, and you see your own life in phases.
Mm.
Share a little bit more about what you mean there.
Yeah. Well, I was inspired to think about this whole concept when I went to have a lecture with somebody called Aviva Wittenberg-Cox, who talks about 4-quarter lives, and she was saying that, you know, if we're going to live for 100 years, you know, you're not going to be finishing your work. You know, this idea that you train till you're 18 or 21, and then you work till you're 65, and then you retire. Actually, that isn't how it is anymore. It's more like a kind of like a Catherine wheel or a spiral, where you're born, you go through one job, then you might go through another job, you get married, you might have babies, you might have babies later, you might have a third job, and so on. And I just think that it's worth us trying to stop thinking about life as a linear path.
Yeah.
You know, I've sort of talked about some of my phases, and I would say that at the moment I'm in a phase of thinking about how I kind of give back my impact to others. That's really important to me. And what it does is if you release the idea of this kind of linear path, it just unlocks that. So my kind of, I think my current phase, which I think I've been in for some while, is really mentoring, helping other people achieve their goals and their dreams, and really giving back. And the science work that I did during the pandemic, sequencing the virus, or having to organize that, was part of that giving back. And that's why I want to be a master of a college, actually, is that paying it forward. So that's the phase that I'm in at the moment. Now, it's really quite interesting, because I've taken on a mastership role for 8 years, and the old currency I'd be thinking, well, I should be retired and you know, like putting on my slippers and not doing too much after that. I'm already thinking, right, 8 years, what am I going to do after that? Because we don't know what's down the line. And so whether you're kind of in your younger years or your older years, we shouldn't let kind of these structures or frameworks that are made by society hold us back. So that's my current transition. But if everyone of my age actually sort of thought, or many people went into a phase of their life where they're paying it forward, or they're thinking about the younger generation, which of course is circular. So you were young once, you develop in your expertise, then you get some skills, you're in a position to help others. If you then always paid it forward in your latter years, that would actually have a huge impact on the young. So everything is circular. And I think that older people, including, you know, people in my position, have a key role in helping the younger generations.
Yeah, I love that everything is circular. I think we'll feed that through, if you're happy with, we'll feed that through to the programs in the charity, because actually,
Yes.
when I set the charity up, it was one of the themes that came through. We were looking actually at why is this escalation of issues that are affecting women and equity and security and empowerment. And one of the issues that came through on that was actually age. And if you looked at the solutions and the
Yes.
gaps in solutions that are out there, it's almost like there are solutions there for younger generations. So, and they go up to somebody in their mid-20s, but then there's no programs for people. And it's like, actually, we should be doing so much more across all of the ages. Age should not be the defining factor for anything.
No.
It's such a barrier, that a bias that we have inside of ourselves.
It is. It is.
It's huge.
Yeah. And imagine the potential you can unlock if you can connect together the two ends of your life, the people that are coming up, people at school, people coming out of school, with the people that have been through their lives and they've learned a lot and have a lot to pay forward, as it were. If you connect the two ends together, I would say there's some pretty, there's fireworks in that. And, you look around and you see many people such as yourself really understanding the importance of that and doing something about it. But if we said to people when they were taking their pension, think about how you can help the younger generation, and think about how we can empower them to make the world a better place and to make the best of themselves.
Yeah.
If everybody made an effort around that way, that would be quite impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very proud of, as I see a woman in her 70s working with us that's doing her PhD, and she's contributing to the work that we do. I see a woman in her 50s who is developing a program for health and well-being within the education system, because clearly there are some challenges there, both culturally for teachers, but also for students as well. And they've got a real passion, a real sense of service around what they're doing now, to take everything that they've learned through decades of experience and throwing that, and myself as well. It's like, what can I now give back? I didn't start out being, people often label me based on what they see now, but actually that's not where I started. A bit like you, I left school when I was 16. Actually, I was slightly different path than you, but left school when I was 16, and everything in me, I'd had no real qualifications to my name. But where I am now is through navigating lots of, joining up the dots, following the breadcrumbs along the way. I'm in a place now of privilege and opportunity where I can do something more for society. And I think the more that we can do that, it's healthy actually for a population that does have so much to give at a later stage in their lives. Now, actually, can I just lean into the health and well-being? There's a lot of talk about this, the 100-year life. What more can we do to look after our health and well-being that can really fuel that longevity and help us in later years? What's your observations and your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, there's so much out there actually that helps you understand what we need to do. If somebody was to come to me and say, how do I maximize my lifespan? And a lot of it is out there, take regular exercise, eat sensibly, don't smoke, don't drink to excess, try and keep your stress levels down, have regular checkups when you're asked to do so, as you're getting older, to make sure you don't have diabetes or high blood pressure and so on. And so there's lots of things that you can do to improve your chances of living a long and healthy life. It's not always easy to do that. So I would say that, for example, some of the, people say always cook with single ingredients, but actually they're often, that can be quite costly. And so, some of the very affordable foods are actually often quite processed, and that can be the ones that are high in fat and salt and so on. So, in particular, thinking about, the kind of the explosion in obesity in this country and elsewhere in the world, I think is it in the developed world, at least, very, very worrying. And if anything is going to hold back our progression as a community to a long-lived society, then I think that's going to be one of the major drivers. And that comes back to, as I say, it feeds into, whether you have enough money to eat healthily, and also areas such as how we can reduce the content of sugar in certain foods. And there's political talk about what could be done there, in the same way that we were all made to wear seatbelts, and we wear crash helmets on motorbikes. Perhaps putting less sugar in food and making it less attractive. There's quite a lot. So there's some things you can do as an individual, and there's some things that I think society can help push towards, to actually nudge towards healthier ways of living. Try and take regular exercise and eat well.
I think this points to morals, ethics, and integrity, because we can push towards personal accountability and agency, but again, there's this moral code that you would expect of organizations, that it doesn't have to be regulated. People, leaders, because it's not the institution, it's not the organization, it's not the culture, it's actually behind all of that sits the leadership. The tone is set by the top, the figureheads. Even without regulation, even without rules being imposed on us, what shifts, decisions can we make today for a better future for our society, for community? That does mean fundamentally we might have to change some things within our organizations, and maybe it does mean that we have some implications for our profit lines. Now, COG UK, because I think this is particularly special, the scientific world clearly anticipated that at some point something would come of a serious nature from a pandemic perspective. To the normal layperson, we could never have anticipated something like this. My observation is, in the biggest tragedy and the biggest trauma for so many people around the world, it also brought us together in a very different way. The sense of community, the collaboration, in service of a higher purpose. And you led COG UK. Tell us a little bit more about COG UK, because I think it's so powerful in the sequencing work that you've been doing, the technologies that help us to understand the evolution of pathogens, diseases, and that help us to tackle these things in the future.
Yeah. Well, I think that if you go back to the fundamentals of how we all evolve, and pathogens evolve very quickly because they actually kind of they multiply very quickly. So so for a bacterium, for example, its multiplication is every 20 minutes in ideal circumstances. There'll be one, there'll be two, then there'll be four. So you can see how they have a chance to evolve over time by changing the genetic code that really is the fundamentals of what they are and how they interact with the world. When the pandemic virus first emerged, there was a question about whether it was going to evolve to become a fitter version of itself. And by fitter, that's really a question of, would it spread more quickly? So it was actually, the pandemic virus did spread pretty effectively. So it had a sort of this marker, it's called R0, but all that means is it was 2.8, which means if I've got COVID, I'm likely to give it to 3 people, and each of those are going to give it to 3 people. So it's a measure of transmissibility. But would it become more transmissible, which would be problematic for us? Would it sort of get round our immune system? So we build up immunity to pathogens once we've been infected by them. But actually, if a new virus can get around that, then it can affect us again. And it means that our vaccines are not going to be as effective. And the third thing about evolving, would it evolve to become a more serious pathogen? Would it cause even more disease and cause people to die? And the only way of really tracking that is to start to sequence the genome, and that means you kind of decode every letter of the genetic code of the virus and see where mistakes happen in that code, which could then change the way it behaves. So, a kind of single change in a letter, if you like, of the genetic code could lead to the way it kind of, for example, interacts with our cells. And so the virus is called a coronavirus because it's covered in like a crown of studs, and those studs attach to our human cells, and that's how they get into our body in the first place. That's how they cause the infection. And so a mutation may occur that actually changes that interaction a little bit, so it's more transmissible or can actually get past our immune system. So very early on, end of February 2020, that was like we had fewer than 60 known cases in the UK back then. Sir Patrick Vallance, who's our government chief science advisor, and Sir Chris Whitty, our chief medical officer, said, we're going to need to sequence the virus to see how the genetic code is changing over time, and then link that up to it's the way it's behaving in our communities. And and I said, okay, I'm up for that job. And so we didn't have a framework for sequencing the virus, and we set up this organization called COG UK, which ultimately had 600 people in it, all volunteers, nearly all volunteers. And we had 21 sequencing sites across the country. Most of those were universities, actually, but 4 of them were the 4 public health agencies in the United Kingdom. And one was what's called the Wellcome Sanger Institute, a very big sequencing capability. And we all got together, and I led that initiative so that we could sequence the virus from across the country, from people who were in hospital or people in the community, and work out what its genetic code was doing, and then try to link that to the way it was behaving. So that was really about trying to plan our interventions, really. Is it going to be more transmissible? Do we need to redesign our vaccines so they're more effective? So that's what we did from the start of the pandemic onwards.
What strikes me is, well, first of all, the hidden heroes that we never,
Yes.
and especially when there's so much narrative around us, and particularly with organisations like the police, the NHS, anything to do with kind of government institutions and statutory bodies, is we so often hear across the media about the challenges, the issues, the wait lists, everything that's going wrong, a broken system. And yet behind all of that, there's a bigger picture and a lot of hidden heroes. And what was so beautiful through COVID is how we understood the real heroes, the real critical jobs that directly impacted society collectively, individually. To see that emerge as clapping for the NHS, I know we've not continued that, but actually I think there's a different kind of respect for the institutions that the UK does have, that really helps to provide that social value, that impact at the most baseline level. With Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's actually how do we provide security and safety at the most basic level, and the quality of the structure that we do have. Let's reflect on this, because you've got 600 volunteers that are mobilized around a major agenda that's very high profile and global. And they are scientists at the cutting edge of research and scientific developments. And it's quite often a competitive environment. It's not about the we, it's about the I, my research, my papers, my recognition. But when you've got 600 people from a whole range of diverse backgrounds and organizations come into this type of setup, how do you create that mobilization and that alignment and that consortium in its most healthiest format?
I would say that this was a unique situation, because during COVID, it was a coalition of the willing.
Right.
And there were many people who really wanted to do something to help. So, if they could go into their labs and sequence the virus and feed this into information that analysed whether it was changing or not, and that could be fed to, public health agencies and government, they actually felt they were contributing something. And lots of people actually felt it was difficult for them to contribute, and so this actually gave them an opportunity to contribute. And people, everybody would say, "I'm so pleased to be contributing something to this." And it was the coalition of the willing. So if you didn't want to join, there was absolutely no one was going to force you. And in fact, everyone was working, unpaid or largely unpaid. The money that we got from government paid for the sequencing, the technologies, but not for salaries. So that was the first thing, that this was really unique, and people wanted to give back. There was a huge sense of actually giving back to try and help, bring information through science to bring the pandemic under control. I think the other thing that was important for me is that, and that meant that the second key thing is that all the data, the basic premise on which I founded it, is that everything we did was made freely available the sequence data was released globally. all of the analytic tools that, to analyze those mutations in the genome were released into the public. And so there wasn't any of that kind of like, I'm not releasing my data till I've written my nice science paper. Everything was released. And I think that came down again to the altruistic nature of people at that time. So that was really important. And I suppose it is like that pandemic brought people together. I think the third thing I would say is that in science is often a hierarchy. So there's what's called a PI, a principal investigator, who's like leading everything, and it's very centralized, and one person controls what other people do. What I decided to do was decentralize and devolve everything. So the people that could do something like develop a method or develop an analytical tool or whatever would be the people who would lead it, and then we'd have weekly meetings to say how's it going. So I devolved all of that innovation and kind of entrepreneurship to the people that could do it, and I led from the back. And when it came to publishing any work in science journals, I sort of had a kind of a collective. So we would put our name, COG UK, and that would have a kind of little list attached to it of six everyone who'd done the work, 600 people's names on it. So there was a kind of publication premium, but I never insisted that I was actually, first or last, which is usually the sort of top science position when you're publishing or anything. I simply led from the back. That meant absorbing some, there were some challenges along the way, and I would have to absorb that. But people would say to my friends, is it right that Sharon's really leading COG UK? Because she's not on, she's not leading the papers, and she's not kind of first author or last author on that important science paper, etc. And people in the consortium would say, yeah, she's leading it, it's fine. But I wasn't. I was leading from the back, and I was leading through a sense of service and purpose. Actually, I just had one purpose, and that was getting that data to people who could understand it and use it.
There's something here, I think, as you project forward, and I know that you continue to be on your learning and contribution journey. So it's clear that you combine this personal growth, but that in isolation, it could be anything, but you couple that with in service of, which is leading to some of the most profound legacy of any leader out there. For myself, as we went through COVID, I felt pretty helpless because I felt more unskilled than ever before. And there's a question around what's your value really to society. I imagine that's the case for so many people that felt like actually their role, their purpose really shaken up. And even now I think about if true crises happened, of which we see the volatility on so many different levels around the world, what contribution could I make? And what I'm learning from you is actually the lifelong learning. You can always make a contribution. You can always pivot to thinking about how you can make a difference in the world. Your legacy is clearly already defined, but you see the years and decades ahead of you as you've got more to give. What does the future look like for you?
You're right that I'm always in service of other people, and that is why I believe that I'm on this planet. I'm not here for myself. I'm here to serve others. But what's the future? Sometimes you go to interviews and they say, what are you going to be doing in 5 years? Or, what are we going to be doing in 10 years? I have no idea. There may be another phase tucked into my life somewhere. I'm kind of in my sort of pay it forward phase, and that may last until my final breath. But to say, what am I going to do next? I'm going to become the Master of Churchill. I'm there for 8 years. I'm going to do my very best in service of that community of students, fellows, staff, alumni. And in that regard, I'm going to do what I always do, and that is take every day a step at a time. So I'm not very good at predicting, and looking back, I would have never made the right predictions about my life. And so I tend to not do that now.
And if I were to take you to your darkest, most challenging time in your life, what would that be? I know that you shared about the tsunami with Jonathan.
Yes.
Is that still there for you?
That was a very dark moment in my life when I was working in Thailand and the tsunami hit Boxing Day 2004. And I was actually fortunate in being in Bangkok at the time rather than by the beach. But many of my neighbours, school friends of my children, they didn't ever return.
Yeah.
That was really hard. Also difficult was that I went with a team of people down to the affected area in Thailand and did some medical work down there, and that was utterly heartbreaking to go to the hospitals and see very large boards full of people's photographs who were missing and people looking for their loved ones. And the devastation, I've never seen devastation like it. Actually, whole villages completely gone, and that actually affects me very deeply still, actually. So I guess that was one of my darkest times. And coming back to a feeling of helplessness, that wasn't something that happened to me. I mean, the death of my father affected me very much, actually, because I felt that as a doctor, I should have been able to do more in trying to detect his disease early and help. That was a very personal thing. But with the tsunami, it comes back to this feeling of helplessness. So we were doing something useful at the time, but that it, like people in the pandemic, is very difficult to know what you could really do to make a difference, other than to try and patch people up, understand, whether people had been lost, and I was sort of that was the difficult time. But there was a sense of helplessness because the damage had already been done, and there wasn't much there's nothing you could do to put it right. All you could do is make some sort of contribution to the science and the medicine in the region. So yeah, I guess what is really interesting actually, Leigh, is that I used to think about that a lot. I don't think about it so much anymore, and I think it's probably deeply suppressed now. When I think about it, it's actually quite kind of wrenching for me. But yeah, that was a very deep and dark moment. I would say that actually being a doctor, you think you're going to be quite kind of knowledgeable in things. And coming back to my father, that I was a junior doctor when he was diagnosed with bowel cancer, and you always find yourself looking back thinking, could I have, he was complaining of a few symptoms, could I have done something more? Could I use my expertise? So that's also something that sits with me. I have to sort of let go of that, but that's a sort of more personal difficult period, I think, for me.
Yeah.
All that knowledge, and I couldn't actually help my dear father to reach a rapid diagnosis and get cured. And of course he wasn't cured, unfortunately. He died a bit later of metastatic disease.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And these things do sit with us, so that when we do go back there, I feel it personally as you're sharing that. And I had my mother living with us. Jonathan was an absolute superstar through the last few years of her life as she navigated through that, and we were her main carers whilst juggling jobs, and that sense of helplessness, caring roles, things were completely out of your control, and there's residue. What were your thoughts? What were your lessons?
Well, grief is always rotten, and there's no getting away from that. And so I guess the lesson I learned back then is that grief is a painful process. I guess that as you move away from that, you realise several things really. One is that you're only grieving so much because you love that person so much, and so you can't beat yourself up. You're saying could have done more for your mum. You can't. It is what it is, and you feel like you do because you love that person and they loved you back. So that's a sort of sign of a kind of strong relationship. But also, having worked in palliative care, which we haven't sort of dived into, but I was a palliative care nurse for several years actually, whilst I was doing my A-levels part-time, and that really did teach me the value of at the end of the day not taking life too seriously, actually, because we've talked a lot about aspiration and striving and so on. That's important to have a kind of interesting life, but along the way, don't forget to love and live, and have the best life that you can, because there's only one certainty in life, and that is the last breath that we take. So just reminding ourselves that even if you're having a bad day or things are not going in your direction, you're alive. The fact that you've been born is a massive sort of chance of luck. That the probability that you are going to be born is the statistics, or the probabilities are kind of are astronomically low that you're actually going to be born in the first place. Therefore, kind of live your life, enjoy your life to the full if you can. And despite everything I've said, actually my philosophy is don't take life too seriously and have a bit of a laugh sometimes.
Yeah. Two certainties in life, not one certainty: death and taxes.
Well, not for everybody, it seems, but
that's very true. That's very true. What was I thinking? That leads me very nicely to our conclusion. One top tip then.
I guess based on what I've said today, I have two top tips. One is believe in your right to learn if that's what you want to do, and don't let anybody squash you. And I think the other thing is really ask, and sometimes your request will be answered, and there's lots of people out there to help you. So knock on the door, pick up the phone, write the email, and see if somebody's willing to help you take that next stage in your life. So yeah, learn and ask and learn.
I think we need to add two tools to implement to our audience and our women in our programs, to have the quote, "I have the right to ...
Yes, absolutely. Whatever it is you want to do.
Whatever it is.
Yes.
Is to almost like start your sentence off with that. Put the building blocks in place. Look, Sharon, you are an absolute joy and pleasure to speak with. I could speak with you for hours. I could learn so much.
Well, so could I actually. Yeah.
I've been wholly inspired, but thank you so much for today and helping to inspire so many young people and women and our leadership audiences that will be listening today, that will learn so much from your wisdom and experience.
Well, thank you so much, and wishing all of those the young women who are listening all the very best in their aspirations. Just go and get it.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.